Welcome to Fortune Forecast. I am Daisy, your hostess, and in this book, we continue with the reading of the book titled The Gist of It for Healing, Health, and Happiness by Haydon Rochester. It is in the public domain, published in 1919. If you're new to my channel, welcome. And if you found us at this video and would like to catch up with this particular book, please visit my book playlist and access the previous chapter. And to our returning community, welcome back. Thank you so much for being a part of this community. I will take a few minutes now and share my narrator's comment on the previous chapter. One thing I've noticed with authors that have been real-life doctors, such as the author of this book, Dr. Haydon Rochester, who was a doctor both in the general medical and surgical practice, and then he specialized in the field of nervous and mental disorder. One thing I've noticed is that they have more of an academic clinical structure in the way that they put their paragraphs together, and it's sometimes challenging to flow with it, so bear with me. It seemed that in the previous chapter, the author was building a foundation, kind of going into the psychological mechanics, the motives, the definitions, the sexuality, and all these things, even the personality that brings up different factors that eventually are what we call those fine layers that serve as a foundation and provide each human resources to make choices, to feel, to live life. I was taken aback with the statistic number provided by Dr. Haydon Rochester, stating that 4/5 of human disability is mental and emotional tension. That is huge. That's almost like the whole part, right? This allows me to segue into something known as the placebo effect. Some of you may have heard of that. I will drop a few links from brainfacts.org and also from WebMD to give you a little more on this. In a nutshell, Henry Beecher, while treating wounded American soldiers during World War II, he ran out of the painkiller morphine, and he was really desperate to help these soldiers, and so he continued telling the soldiers that he was giving them morphine, but it truly was a saline solution. It turned out that 40% of the soldiers reported that they were treated from their pain, and it was actually the saline solution that was provided to them. According to WebMD, a placebo is anything that seems to be a real medical treatment, but isn't. And according to WebMD, there has been research done that has shown this relationship of mind and body. Pretty much narrowing it down to if a person expects a pill to do something, then it's possible that the body's own chemistry can cause effects similar to what the medication may have and was intended to do. And these recent studies of mind and body are only bringing us confirmations how powerful the mind is, and confirming the statement made by Dr. Rochester, 4/5 of the diseases or ailments we see out there are either mental or emotional. Another point that I'd like to share that maybe you were able to capture from the first chapter was the explanation of pretty much energy itself. And Rochester defined it as the universal basis of all manifest existence, describing it as that living, indestructible, yet convertible, urging vibration, constantly accumulating within us to be discharged physically, mentally, or emotionally. Or else may some of us have heard something similar in religion. In the Bible, where God is described as omnipotent, meaning all-powerful, omniscient, meaning all-knowing, and omnipresent, meaning present everywhere at all times. Sounds like energy to me. Well, enough on that. Those were my key takeaways. Leave me your comment. Let me know what your highlight points were. I'd love to read them. Let's move on to part 2, good health and healing. Considerations physical. As stated at the outset, well-being consists in nothing short of a sound, well-coordinated, well-nourished organism in progressing phases of appropriate purposeful function, prompted by truly inspired motives in mutually balanced adjustment and regularly reinvigorated by rest and recreation. In short, complete living. And since we have found that the physical cannot be just taken for granted, we will open our discussion by obtruding some observations on it. Air. If you were a fish, would you presume to live in negligent or disdaining disregard of your ocean? No, you would not. You would appreciate your life's medium and negotiate it to its utmost resource. Yet many humans do presume to disregard their life's medium, the circumambient atmosphere, and therefore need reminding of its all-surpassing merits. Air is our real and utterly indispensable, all-sustaining element, fresh and ever circulating from right outdoors, day or night, moist or dry, the real reinvigorant, exhilarant, deodorant, and disinfectant par excellence. So breathe, and breathe, and breathe. And then keep right on breathing. Fresh, pure air, the very inspiring breath of the Spirit, from out of which is all creation, both manifest and coming. So know this when you breathe and revitalize your soul. Adopt some simple though systematic breathing exercises suitable for yourself, nor forget from time to time exaggerated exhalation which rids the lungs or stagnant air pockets. Water. Then water, nature's other element, pure, fresh, virgin life, which composes and contents each living thing. You cannot use too much, inwardly or outwardly, though all too easily you may neglect this virtue too. Not that I fancy that any of my probable readers may be uncleanly, but many may have forgotten the merits of the inward sluice. So then let us drink, even as we breathe, deep, drenching draughts of this pure water of the Spirit, which both purges and restores. I do not hesitate to urge a half glass every half hour, or its equivalent if at longer intervals, and as much as you like at meals. The temperature may be optional, but the quality should be intelligently determined. We will not here presume to dictate the technique of bathing, assuming that to be individually adequate, and with some possibly going to even unwise extremes. Only cultivate the instinctive sense of cleanliness, avoiding contaminating contacts, as with money or other promiscuous things, and cleansing at once if such contact is made. Rest. And now rest. Stop, cease, quit whatever you are doing, feeling or thinking every night for all night, and also for a good interval each day. Real rest, especially if sleeping, is nature's supreme restorer and prefers to further benefits soon to be presented. The human race is in a state of continuing chronic exhaustion, with all of its accompanying irritability, from overconcern and engagement with objective things, persons, and principles. The remedy and the regeneration are only but surely to be found in disengagement from the projected and withdrawal into the realm of the serene, subjective soul. Food. The question of food should here be dismissible in a few words. Most everybody knows enough to eat, but there are very few who know enough not to, for it is literally and disgustingly true that we dig our graves with our teeth. Although by nature omnivorous and equipped to thrive vigorously on a fully diversified dietary of average prime quality, yet arterial old age can be postponed and all uric acid and cognate ailments dispersed by adopting a diet containing no nitrogenous animal food whose end products are their cause. For the rest, use your own good judgment, as confirmed by your experience, only making sure to eat every day of something that is fresh and living, that is to say, not killed by cooking or protracted keeping, and thus renew your own life from the truly living sources. Also, join Mr. Horace Fletcher, who brings a true message, and appreciate the beneficence of time in this as in all other good. Exercise. And since you have doubtless eaten, you must exercise. Even though your regular work may be physically laborious, one might even say, especially in that case, adopt, employ, and now and then interrupt some alternating systems of rhythmical exercise that are simple, free movements performed without straining effort, and including especially some that bow and open out the neck and spine, such as dropping fully forward the head and bending to its extreme the entire back. Moreover, these exercises should be taken spontaneously and in a spirit of exhilaration, for if purely perfunctory, they are practically worthless. Always remember that strength of any kind is gained by drawing on it, not merely by waiting for it. Sunshine, shelter, clothing. We will take for granted that you appreciate sunlight and avail yourself of all its benefits when accessible. It has all the virtues of air, as above depicted, as well as others in addition. Unfortunately, however, our sedentary need for necessary shelter usually results in the construction of the same without adequate ingress provided for either air or sunshine. The very erection of a roof puts those under it in shadow, and the essentially civilized need for keeping interiors warmed too often precludes always fresh air. But ingenuity is a psychological attribute, so let us begin to use it here to circumvent these deprivations. We will not presume to dictate taste in clothing, which, thank fortune, is and should be various, but simply suggest apparel suitable to seasons and types, and discount freaks and extremes of either kind. Not forgetting that the physical envelope is truly worthy of its just esteem, and that the inner genius finds a finer, truer expression when vibrant through its own concordant color and component tone. Above have been briefly set forth the cardinal physical factors for good health, and it should be superfluous to say that healing itself is facilitated by paying due deference to them, but the latter will be treated of presently. Superstitions. So now for good health psychological. And here, alas, may be a garden sorely in need of weeding, even before good seed can find any room whatever in which to root. To begin with, there are certain general misconceptions or pathological superstitions which, when entertained, may render one needlessly dubious as to one's health, or, through morbid contemplation of them, operate as deterrents to recovery from disease. So let us dispose of these at the outset, and thus be rid of the worthless weeds. Heredity. The first one is that concerning the alleged dreadfulness of heredity, which is such an unnecessarily terrifying thought to so many people. As a matter of fact, heredity is a practically negligible factor in disease, for syphilis is the one and only disease taint that can be inherited, and even its effects can be mitigated. But, of course, there is a principle of heredity by which we derive likeness, disposition, constitution, and temperament, and if our forebears reacted to conditions in the way which would naturally result in this disease, we, having a similar constitution and temperament, will, if we react in the same unenlightened ways, probably manifest similar disorder. But the heredity, so far as the disorder is concerned, is merely apparent, not real, and constitutes no obstacle to recovery when the light begins to dawn. Insanity, cancer, tuberculosis, and all the others are then mere vanished shadows. Prenatalism. Prenatal influence is another factor to which a great deal of undue weight is given, although it sometimes manifests in quite startling ways. This happens far less frequently than is usually supposed, and abnormal conditions presumed to be permanently fixed in prenatalism have repeatedly been corrected. Disease. No disease should be regarded as a distinct entity in itself, for all disease is simply a reaction to or compromise of opposing forces and has no specific endurance of its own. Acute diseases are merely nature's reaction to contamination and signify active vitality making its usually winning fight, while chronic or functional disorder is an unnecessary compromise of the conflict. Wearing out. There is no irreplaceable wearing out of tissue when subjected to the strains considered. There may be temporary reduction in vitality, but when respite is afforded and the right chord is struck, the response will be vigorous and better than ever. Duration. The duration of an ailment bears but a secondary relation to the time period for recovery. Persons sick for 20 years have been known to get well in 20 minutes when the right thing was done, and all real healing is rapidly progressive. Change of life. The menopause or change of life need not be a critical time for anyone. Certain gratuitous predispositions sometimes emerge at this period, but it does not prevent correction, and in no case need any trouble be anticipated. Sex incidents. Spontaneous sexual experience, which is that, as such, and not outrage or physical damage, is incapable of producing disability. Even the so-called sexual perversions are essentially harmless from the physical standpoint, although all such expressions may be a waste of potentialities which could be diverted to more desirable attainment. Nervous. Nervous disorders have nothing to do with the nerves themselves, which in such cases are always normal. The words nervous and nervousness are used to describe the general condition of the person affected, which has been explained in preceding pages, but there is no change or deterioration in the actual nerves, nor do the mere nervous affections ever merge into insanity. 14 recommendations. At this point, believing them of definite value for both getting and keeping well, the writer ventures the following general recommendations. 1. Care for your physical body in all respects: air, water, rest, food, exercise, sunshine, shelter, clothing, and functions, and do not endure detrimental conditions when you do not have to. 2. Do not practice persistent self-repression. All energy is claiming constructive outlet, and we thrive only through expression. 3. Do not remain indefinitely in a state of indecision or suspense. Come to a decision and end your suspense just as quickly as possible. You might better decide wrong and profit by the experience than remain submerged in a state of indecision. All life is a succession of experiences. All experience is a reception of energy. All energy is the raw material for anything you choose. So let us remember this in each and every strain, and instead of disintegrating, take a sound temper. 4. Do not enter into any permanent compromise, business, matrimonial, family, partnership, with yourself or anyone else. A temporary compromise is sometimes expedient, but permanent ones never. Their strain accumulates and eventually undermines, so be redeemed. 5. Realize things for just what they are. Realization need not imply specific action, for attitude and conduct are two different things, and you can realize a great deal without taking any action, but an artificial attitude will eventually break you. The realization will not prove so bad anyway. 6. Learn to do things easily, the unstrained, effortless subconscious way, and keep yourself well nourished mentally. 7. Be honest with yourself and put your house in order, but do not take things too seriously, even yourself. 8. Do not hold too closely the family association and ties, which is sometimes done to a degree that is merely maudlin, and amounts to but a pooling of weaknesses. To such I say, you do but wallow in a litter. There is still greater, nobler living, which is less personal and promiscuous, and gives the soul its room. 9. Do not feel too much responsibility for others. They can only develop by living their own lives, and the same is true for you. So live a clean, often refreshed, and unfettered life, kept clear of accumulating debris. 10. Nor let us defame, nor despise, nor seek to dominate. Damn and devil are the same evil ilk which the time has come to discard. 11. Disabuse your mind of all its limiting, outworn preconceptions. It is a new age that is dawning anyway. 12. Be yourself. You are God's beloved intention. Do your best, that you may be justified. Think high, that you may think higher. Pray, for there is God, all-knowing, all-loving, and all-able, and only waiting for you to care. 13. Seek ye first the kingdom. This saying is ancient, but unspeakably true. And 14. Trust. Healing methods. Realizing now more fully the real nature of disease and disorder, which so often is merely a compromise of morbid suggestion, repressed emotion, ignorance, and fear, exerting unfavorable effects on mind and body, we are better equipped for solution of the problem and restoration to normal. The intrinsic tendency of all life is to renew itself and continue living, and therefore the faculty of healing or recovering permeates all living things. But there may be indolent inertia or disfavoring obstacles to healing. When we work to provoke it by reaction or to remove the obstacles and render conditions favorable, and since the measures exploited are so numerous and become not infrequently an element in the disorder, it seems proper at this point to pause and review them. Surgery. Beginning with the most radical, there is surgery, applicable exclusively to straight physical problems, and urgent and indispensable in conditions of hemorrhage, open wounds, pus, intrusion of foreign bodies, and correction of certain injuries and deformities, but seldom advisable or beneficial further. The practice of surgery has long been conducted as well as is humanly possible, so that true progress would now consist in making it unnecessary, and the same applies to dentistry. Medicine. Medicine comes next and has its place. The value of agencies for the urgent relief of pain, emergency stimulation, purgation as antidotes to poisons and for other temporary alleviations is obvious. But beyond this, their usefulness is decidedly slight and often reprehensible, though the suggestive effect is occasionally remedial. The same is true of the various light, electricity, and other elementary applications, while few of the serums fulfill their promise. But the premature repudiation of beneficent medicinal creation is carrying things to fanatical extremes. For the plainly indicated use of medicine implies no inherent recreance and may even be a responding to the infinite intention. Manipulation. The manipulative methods of osteopathy and chiropractic are quite rational. To the average patient, they are without risk of harm, and by relaxing or adjusting the neuromuscular tension which exists in all disorders as the result of straining attitude, definite relief may be afforded, which can result in ultimate recovery. This is also the virtue of the hydropathic and heat methods. Suggestion. Suggestion and autosuggestion are at work everlastingly anyway, and since we are practically free to choose, we might better select suggestions which contain the living truth that elevates rather than the adverse destructive sort. Literature and modern philosophy in general, to say nothing of special New Thought and Christian Science utterances, fairly teem with concepts of merit, nourishment, and uplift freely and graciously proffered, and of which it were certainly wise to avail oneself. Metaphysics. Metaphysical and faith healing are realities many times, and it is not scientific to ignore them, nor those certain rare souls, often humble and untutored, who seem to be natural healers. For it is entirely possible, to say nothing of being desirable, for some effective concept of healing, from whatever source, to permeate the whole subconscious, and there resolve or neutralize the basic strains responsible for the disorder. In any case, the end in view is healthy, wholesome reconstruction on a sound, ongoing basis, so we are in favor of all that do good without harm. Healing. But any or all of the crystallized systems may fail, even in curable cases, for the practice of healing is an art and can never be reduced to a science, any more than painting a picture, bringing up children, or writing a psalm, though some scientific knowledge is involved, which it behooves the artist to possess. The purpose of healing is restoration to normal, a state of unself-conscious well-being, which is different for every individual, not stereotyped or a pattern for all to reflect alike. And the principles of healing can never be comprehended in terms of any healing method, because they embrace relationships which are universal and transcend any mere system of control. It is, of course, presumed that all of the physical requirements are being met, for these are well known, and there is no excuse for their omission when available. But we now know how important the psychological factors are, and can understand how these obstructions may prove more baffling. Self-help. Yet if you would like to help yourself, go back to the beginning and read this treatise all over again, even between the lines, and in doing so sit down by yourself and ponder where the applications might be, though you may not see them the first time. It would not be any superficial self-evident matter that could get you into such predicaments, so you must introspect deeply, exploring, illuminating, and ventilating the remote corners of your subconscious. Then deal with what you find as recommended, boldly and straightforwardly, respecting only truth. assistance. But, as stated before, the problem is always an individual one, and perhaps mere generalities will not suffice, and the harassed, desperate patient requires personal assistance. Successful, permanent curing will then involve three things: a frank, unburdening analysis of the exact nature of the disorder in terms of its own specific cause, genuine, satisfying enlightenment on all troublesome points, and wholesome reconstruction on a sound, true basis. Stated in another way, we first should have completely established precisely what we are dealing with in order to dispose of it utterly, then correct all morbid misconceptions, provide discharge for all pathological tension, resolve all inner conflicts, and induce readjustment on genuine, healthy lines. This is the gist of the entire matter. But as between patient and healer, there are certain special conditions essential to success. Requirements. In the first place, there must be what is called rapport. That is to say, a reasonable degree of mutual confidence, trust, sympathy, or willingness to come together on the case. Entirely candid, unreserved cooperation is the second requirement. And finally, there must take place that subtle, indefinable, subjective, but conclusive process, tentatively called transference, which cannot be coerced, but which follows spontaneously when the other conditions are fulfilled, and by which the real cure is made, and for the sake of which, also, no healer should officiously obtrude his ministrations, but rather should wait until appealed to for relief, as did the Master, who also said, "Go and tell no man." Obstacles. But again, even with the best intentions on the part of both healer and patient, there may be obstacles in the way. First of all, there exists in everyone a natural resistance to intrusion or correction, which may lead him to reject or repudiate all the better conceptions that might cause him to relinquish his own or expose their errors. Besides that, the disorder is really a compromise or refuge for one at bay, and will be clung to tenaciously on this account, as well as because it provides an outlet for emotion otherwise repressed. The inertia of habit has also to be reckoned with, to say nothing of the fact that in certain cases the patient may have an interpretation of his own for the phenomena, which puts his case in a class absolutely by itself and quite out of the reach of any person to cope with, in his opinion. And many of these misguided conclusions are arrived at unconsciously, so that the victim is by no means altogether to blame. Facilities. But unfortunately, we now can deal with these conditions in spite of their baffling character, for modern psychology has provided means for exploring the subconscious and discovering and unraveling its tangles. Word associations, dream analysis, and scrutiny of the constant little psychopathological mechanisms of manner, speech, and action tell a story and discover the material which comprises the repressed subconscious life of the subject and can be disposed of for his relief. The gist of it. This last is the crux of the whole matter. We have already seen that motive or fundamental desire is really detriment for all that appears, and it likewise conditions recovery. In other words, you can get well of anything if you desire to, is single and paramount. Information. For a way has been devised for solving these problems on their own terms, penetrating the wall that shuts off the subconscious, discovering and discharging the morbid complexes effecting the necessary readjustments and reconstructing unity and well-being. The mind may be conceived of as a moving picture camera, with the film sliding by and registering all experiences instantaneously and many unobserved, then slipping on to the next, though there is some reaction to each. When the photographic reel is projected on the screen, all these pictures blend into one another, making an apparently smooth, continuous story whose interest grips and makes you overlook details or leaves them blurred. In fact, experts have to go over the actual reels, correcting and taking out flaws, and adjusting the parts to make a smooth, continuous production. They do this by stopping the reel at the doubtful sections, scrutinizing each negative carefully, perhaps even with a microscope, and making the necessary corrections. Likewise, a trained observer can study your case, detecting, even in the flow of the film, many details unperceived by you, and being equipped with instruments of precision is able, if you are willing, and will halt for a space the rush of the machine, to discover these details to you and facilitate your adjustment of them. Technique. In a series of conversational conferences without artificial process or undue influence of any sort, hypnotic, suggestive, or otherwise, a case can be analyzed, reconstructed, and set on the road to recovery, equipped with immunity against future disorder as well. The first consultation considers the complete history of the case, even from infancy, as well as possible hereditary factors, and thus affords a knowledge of all illnesses, injuries, surgical operations, or other episodes of physical import and possible psychological influence, which should be known for purposes of precision, since true healing must definitely find out and actually dispose of the exact cause of the disorder. Any physical investigation that seems indicated is properly made or reported upon, such as testing the reflexes for lesions, the eyes, the manner of speech, the general gait and carriage, as well as considering any particular disability that presents. Then, to eliminate the personal equation and secure clues to the causation, we proceed to the word associations, which consist of reading to the subject a list of ordinary words and requiring him to respond to each one by speaking the first word that comes to his mind upon hearing the word read. This is not a process of intellectual thought, but merely a superficial word sounding, though the answer and time required to give it are noted, and the list when complete becomes a schematic diagram of all mental processes, both recent and remote, and points the ways for discharging the various tensions which are responsible for the disability. The patient is then invited to file a complete bill of complaint, slurring nothing, but making the case out just as bad as it has ever appeared, reciting all possible points of aggravation and voicing his own theory as to its nature and the reasons for it. All this time, the practitioner will have been keenly alert, absorbing the problem in all its details and ramifications, and noting points requiring further consideration. And being an observer merely, as well as a trained one, is able to comprehend infinitely more than the harassed subject. At subsequent conferences, the recital, guided by the indicators already secured and others that accrue, passes gradually through the outer accretions of complaint, getting eventually to the basic strains which are at fault, and provides appropriate vent for the morbid complexes so long under repression and therefore causative of disease. The points of particular sensitiveness or irritation are drawn out thoroughly, and this verbal recital, or putting out into words of what before had been merely pent-up feelings and vague stresses, is a measure of relief which is really permanently curative, although perhaps not obviously so until one has enjoyed the experience. At the same time, opportunity is afforded for correcting any morbid misconceptions which serve to keep the disorder fixed and to offer the particular enlightenment and recommendations for the particular problems to be solved. Promise. Apparently unchangeable conditions do not constitute an obstacle, for if one person can effect a healthy adjustment to the inevitable strains of objective life, another can when properly equipped. And the reason why this process of psychological analysis can provide immunity against further disorder is because all such disorder is really predisposed to by stresses or wrinkles of the film made in the plastic period of childhood and serving to distort the subsequent impressions. Hence, by reverting to this early time and smoothing out those wrinkles, their effect is removed, and with maturity now established, no further impressions can produce the distortions which were only possible in the plastic state. Diagram. But before concluding entirely our consideration of these things in terms of the objective, let us analyze some specific form of disability which shall serve to illustrate all of the basic principles that we have been expounding. Let us take, for example, deafness, a condition trying both to victim and companions, and which has come on in the usual way through the various stages of what the specialists would call otitis media. And first, we should have a real comprehension of all the factors involved. Our upper air passages perform two functions in addition to that of merely admitting and expelling air. Inside the nasal cavity and upper throat, there are highly specialized tissues whose duty it is to adjust the temperature of every breath, however hot or cold, to a degree suitable for reception in the lungs. And the second of the two additional functions of these passages is the serving as channels for expression of our thoughts and feelings, namely speech and all other vocalization, including even singing. If now a person's circulation is congested from previous continued food excess, his delicate temperature equalizers, there in the upper air passages, must work at a serious disadvantage. And when his circulation is further strained by his body being subjected to droughts or chilling, the region of these sensitive regulators become itself congested, clogged, and catarrhal, and the unhappy victim has what we call a cold, acute or chronic according to the merit of his hygiene. Furthermore, the continuing experiences of objective life are perpetually affecting our sensibilities and inducing emotions or attitudes which then have their claim or expression, and likewise congest its channel if merely choked back or stifled. For instance, an attitude of inescapable personal revulsion, if denied all vent or amelioration, would thus arbitrarily stifled, vainly prompt to the reaction of physical gagging, with these straining energies then precipitated into tissue congestion and thus reproducing the previous pathological picture, which shows in quite material form that all is, in fact, but the adventitious error of objective mortal mind. But this abnormal state, however superinduced, may then, if not arrested by genuine correction, extend to adjacent parts, up, down, or sideways, and can pass by way of the escutcheon tube to the cavity of the ear, there impairing the hearing function and resulting in what we call deafness, which after all is not in the true primary sense an ear trouble, and could have been, or can be, obviated or corrected at any stage by an improved hygiene and intelligent psychological readjustment, which affords real outlet for the morbid feelings whose energies the victim may not be sufficiently enlightened of himself to dispose constructively. And these same principles obtain throughout all pathology, from insomnia to hemorrhoids. For example, the so-called female diseases, the most fertile of all fields for non-traumatic surgery, supervene upon insult to these functions, either positive or negative, and, in the presence of morbid psychology, precipitation of these energies into congestion, displacement, or tumor. Moreover, it might not be amiss for clinicians to bear in mind the reciprocating responsiveness of all orificial tissues, which conduces to vicarious manifestations or displacement of lesions to the alternative site. Yet, cure is unfailingly feasible through searching personal reconstruction and true coordination. Though nothing short of enlightened, continuously constructive living is compatible with good health, for all energies are periodically claiming their just measure of expression, and unless wisely disposed, are more apt to rend or deform than to rear. Whatsoever the experiences or strain, it carries its charge of raw energy, which latter is eternally transmutable, and mankind is endowed with choice. Choose, therefore, that the product shall be good, not rending but rearing, a life fine and beautiful and free from all taint. End of part 2. All right, let's head over to the next video where we'll continue with part 3, the attainment. If you can take a minute, hit that like button and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about this chapter.